listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in 1 Samuel 22. Saul kills the priests at Nob. 1 Samuel 22 shares one of the darkest chapters in David's life. He's been forced to flee from Saul. He's been separated from his closest friends. He's been misunderstood by many and hunted like a criminal. And yet, even in the middle of fear and tragedy, God continues to preserve his anointed king. This chapter reminds us that God's purposes can't be stopped by human evil, and it ultimately points us to Jesus, the true king, who welcomes the rejected and defeats wickedness forever. The chapter begins with David escaping to the cave of Adullam. And what started as a lonely hiding place soon became the gathering point for an unlikely community. In verse 2, we read this, "And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. And he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men." David didn't attract the wealthy, powerful, or influential. Instead, those who had been crushed by life's hardships, those are the people that came to him. The distressed, the indebted, the discouraged, they all found hope in the presence of God's anointed king. And I'm sure you may be thinking about this already, but this scene beautifully foreshadows Jesus. When Jesus began his earthly ministry, he also attracted people who had nowhere else to turn. Tax collectors, sinners, fishermen, the sick, the demon-possessed, widows, outcasts, they all found grace in him. And while the religious elite often rejected him, those who knew their need gladly followed him. Jesus himself said in Mark chapter 2, verse 17, "I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." David's cave became a place of refuge. Christ's kingdom becomes a place of redemption. Everyone who comes to him by faith finds mercy, forgiveness, and a new identity. David also demonstrated wisdom by taking his aging parents to the king of Moab for protection while he remained on the run. Though his own future seemed a bit uncertain, he continued to care for others. And soon afterward, the prophet Gad delivered an important message. In verse 5, we read this, "Then the prophet Gad said to David, 'Do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah.' So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth." Remaining hidden may have seemed safer, but God directed David back into Judah. The Lord wasn't calling David to live in fear. He was preparing him for the kingdom that would one day be his. There are seasons when obedience requires courage instead of comfort. God's guidance doesn't always lead us toward the easiest path, but it always leads us where his purposes will be fulfilled. Now, like David, we're called to trust God's direction even when it feels risky, and there will certainly be times when it absolutely does. Well, the chapter then shifts to Saul, whose heart has grown increasingly hardened. Surrounded by fearful servants, Saul accuses everyone around him of conspiracy. His jealousy has completely consumed him. And rather than seeking God's will, Saul at this point is driven by suspicion, pride, and rage. And when Ahimelech the priest is brought before Saul, he honestly explains that he had no idea that David had fallen out of favor with the king. He simply believed he was serving one of Saul's most trusted servants. But his explanation made no difference. Saul ordered the execution of the priests of the Lord, but his own guards refused to carry it out. Verse 17 says this, "But the servants of the king would not put their hand to strike the priests of the Lord." Even Saul's soldiers recognized the wickedness of his command. Their refusal stands in sharp contrast to Saul's growing rebellion against God. Sadly, Doeg the Edomite, a man who strikes me as someone who would have done basically anything to look good in Saul's eyes, he willingly carried out the order. Verse 18 says this, "Then the king said to Doeg, 'You turn and strike the priests.' And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests. And he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod." And the slaughter didn't stop there. Saul also destroyed the city of Nob, killing men, women, children, infants, and livestock. Basically, the king who had once refused to completely obey God's command against Amalek in 1 Samuel 15, he now committed horrific violence against the priests of the Lord and the people of Israel. It's interesting to see this because it reveals to us that sin has a devastating way of reshaping a person's heart. Saul's jealousy became hatred. Hatred became violence. Violence became wholesale destruction. And a man who repeatedly rejects God's voice eventually finds himself capable of actions he once would have considered unthinkable. And yet, even here, God's purposes were not defeated. One priest escaped. Abiathar fled to David and told him everything that happened. David responded with genuine grief. We see his response in verses 22 and 23. He says this, "I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping." David didn't distance himself from Abiathar. He welcomed him. He offered protection. He took responsibility for the danger that was connected to his own life. And again, we see a glimpse of Christ. Jesus welcomes those who have suffered because of evil. He receives the broken, protects his people, and promises eternal security. And while David could only offer temporary safety from Saul, Jesus offers everlasting refuge from sin, death, and condemnation. And this chapter also reminds us that following God's anointed king often comes with hardship. David's followers endured uncertainty because they chose to remain with him. Well, Christ never promised his followers an easy road either. Instead, he promised his presence. He said he would remain with us, and he has. And when we face opposition for our faith, we remember that our King has walked this road before us. He too was rejected by earthly rulers. He was falsely accused. He was betrayed, and he was even hunted. And yet through his suffering came our salvation. 1 Samuel 22 teaches us that evil may appear powerful for a season, but it never has the final word. Saul's kingdom was collapsing even while he tried to preserve it through violence. David's kingdom, however, was incrementally growing, one faithful follower at a time. Well, the same is true of Christ's kingdom today. It often grows quietly through changed hearts rather than bombastic displays of earthly power. People burdened by sin and debt and shame and sorrow, they're the ones who continue to come to Jesus, and they find the refuge for their souls that they've been longing for. So if you feel weary today, remember the cave of Adullam. The rejected found a king. But more importantly, remember Jesus. He welcomes everyone who comes to him in faith. In him, the distressed find peace, the guilty find forgiveness, and the fearful discover perfect security. Our King will never abandon those who seek refuge in him. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.